Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Blackadar. I am a Greenfield Community College student, and this project is about queer adoption. It is a socio-legal comparison of different laws in 3 different states and how that impacts 3 different families. So let's get into it. My method for this project was the fact that I analyzed 3 different state laws about adoption, and I researched 2 different families who experienced queer adoption. One is a trans family in Ohio that's going through the process right now, and another is a family from Massachusetts that went through the process in 1980s. And even though there were different laws at the time and they're from different states, their experiences are very comparable. This is important because queer families adopt more than opposite-sex families when you compare the populations. So 20.9% of queer families adopt versus 2.9% of opposite-sex families. They are 3 times more likely to adopt. So adoption laws impact a lot of queer families. Yeah. So let's talk about the federal impact on adoption laws. So gay adoption became legal during the 2016 gay marriage legalization. And that the logic for that was the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees the right to marry as one of the fundamental liberties. And it's because of the 14th that children and families are safeguarded according to the legal recognition to building a home and raising children. So let's discuss a little bit about private adoption versus public adoption. So private adoption is when a mother selects a person to take custody of her children, and adopted parents pay for the legal fees of not only themselves, but the legal fees of the birth parents, as well as sometimes the medical fees of the birth parents. So before banning private adoption, Massachusetts had a high private adoption average, which deterred adoptions. The cost was about $40,000 per child. And the private adoption can create a space where birth parents can choose not to allow queer families to adopt their children and deny them. And there is also situations where they could select queer families on purpose. So it's kind of a catch-22, but it's up to an individual's interpretation, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for people to be protected. Private adoptions also leave birth parents vulnerable because the level of legal counsel that they're receiving is very dependent on the payment of the adopted family. So let's talk about Massachusetts. Massachusetts is pretty great when it comes to queer adoption because there are laws in place. Oh, my cat's destroying the carpet. Okay, we're back. So Massachusetts actually has laws that protect queer families, and because of that, they are pretty solid against adoption agencies and individuals discriminating against them on sexual orientation and gender identity. But it wasn't always like that, obviously. Back in the 1980s, when the couple that I interviewed in the 80s, the couple I interviewed met playing softball, and they also went to a bar after their games where they got to mingle with a lot of other queer members of their community. And through this networking, they got to meet their attorney, who worked practically for free for their adoption. At the time, they couldn't adopt together jointly, even though they were interviewed together. So one of the partners went down to the country that they were adopting from, met the child beforehand, did all of that, and claimed to be single, whereas the other person didn't get to meet the child that they had before actually adopting. And then eventually they got to adopt together when laws started to change, and they were able to find sympathetic judges. So this experience was a little bit it wasn't equal to that of different sex couples. Now, for Ohio, the laws are not as protective as Massachusetts is currently. While gay parents can adopt and do, there's still some verbiage that it still exists today. So one of those is the legally married couple suggestion, where people asked for the laws to be changed from husband and wife together as as who could adopt to legally married couple, and that got voted down. So it currently does say some very gender exclusive terms in the laws. And Ohio also doesn't have non-discriminatory laws. And they do not expressively include sexual orientation or gender identity as protective characteristics. So this does leave queer families vulnerable, but queer families still very much can adopt. And an example of queer families who adopt are friends of mine who live in Ohio, and they actually, it's a private adoption, so a birth mother picked them, and they took their son, and they started raising him, and when they started the legal process, they actually had illegal custody of their son because they didn't get adoption certified before caring for him. So this was a little intense, and they expressed a lot of gratitude finding a helpful lawyer, because they kind of heard through the grapevine about her. Because the mother in the family didn't take their partner's last name, a judge actually tried telling them that she couldn't be on the adoption certificate, and even though he had a copy of their marriage license. So that was something that was a very stressful moment for them, and just shows this very antiquated style of looking at married couples. And the father, who is trans, was given a drug test by a cis man who demanded that he stand during his urination test. And he explained, I don't have the parts, I don't pee like that. And the man didn't really understand it. So the father had to consistently out himself until the agency was able to comply with his needs, which is very frustrating. When it comes to adopting in general, they couldn't get a clear answer of how long the process would be. So and how expensive. So it ranged from $15,000 to $40,000, and they still don't know how much they're going to be paying. And because they don't have legal custody of their child right now, and they're in the process, they don't qualify for any sort of subsidized childcare. So while they're paying for this adoption, paying for the legal fees of their birth parents and them, and then also they're paying for childcare and taking care of this child, they literally pay more in childcare than they do for their mortgage. Georgia is a bit spicy. Their current laws actually have anti-queer adoption laws, and that's the Keep Faith in Adoption and in Foster Care, and that allows private, religious-owned adoption agencies and public state-funded adoption agencies to discriminate against queer families for religious reasons. And of course, they're not protected on individuals' levels of protected class. And that leads me to not being able to find a queer couple in Georgia to interview, which is very frustrating. I reached out to 13 adoption agencies. 4 of them were closed when they were listed as open in certain lists. 5 of them never got back to me. And the 4 that did couldn't really share if they worked with queer families or not. I tried working with queer doctors' offices, and they couldn't find anyone. And I also tried using social media. I made TikToks, I joined Facebook groups, and I couldn't find the community that was supportive. So it makes me wonder what families could do if they need that kind of information. And that leaves me to recommended policies. So 1, set a federal standard, make sure protected classes mean protected classes everywhere so that people can have an equal and fair adoption experience. We need to present clear roadmaps state by state. How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And we need to set clear examples so that people don't have to pay lawyers to understand really vital information. We need to write protected class laws like in Massachusetts instead of the religious right clauses. And unlike Ohio, we need to use some gender inclusive language. Thank you so much for listening to this project. It's a little bit long. I'm sorry my cat came at us, but it is important that we create a fair and equitable adoption experience for the children in this country. Thank you.